Yeah, basically, and then he just rode the alligator off into the sunset. Welcome back, guys.
Hey guys.
Tony and Brandon here to bring you another discussion. Today I want to give a better description than you usually get of if you've ever heard anybody describing life as like a game of hide and seek, or the universe playing hide and seek with itself, or anything like that. If you haven't heard that, it's cool too. We'll explain it. So, the universe is basically trying to, find itself, trying to experience itself and learn about itself. And that's what we are. That's why we're here, and we're able to take in information and turn it into form and description, and we're able to talk about it, and we're able to communicate with others about it, and we're able to grab information and share it with, we're parts of the universe taking information and sharing it with other parts of the universe. So it's quite literally, learning about itself. I know we've talked before about how, life is meaningless but in a good way, and how there's not really any point to life. But at the same time, the universe is in this process. So you can kind of say that's, a point to creation at least. So in order for this to work, the finding of itself, the learning of the universe, can only happen if there's a lack of knowledge about the universe, or a hiding of the universe. So we've also talked before about how we, quite literally are the universe, and how everything in existence, everything in our world, everything in all of what we would call reality, all comes from, that whatever that fundamental source is, that initial energy or consciousness, or however you want to think of it, just that original stuff that made the very first creations in reality. So that's the thing that is trying to figure itself out. And in order to do that, it has to kind of forget itself. So that's what we're doing, in life. We're part of the universe that comes into this existence we call life. And we forget that we're the universe, and then we start learning about it again. So going off of that idea, that's what this talk's going to be about, with a game of hide and seek. I think the most down to earth and practical way to see this is if you've ever gotten to a situation with someone, and maybe you were really mad at them, and you were yelling at them and saying things you didn't mean, and calling them names, and just being mean and saying all kinds of stuff because you were mad at them. And then maybe a couple days later you were thinking about it, and you were like, what was I doing? Like, why did I say that? That's not me. And those are kind of two different levels of consciousness you have going on there. You have one perspective when you're mad that's telling you, this isn't how it's supposed to be, and that person did something wrong, and that person's trying to screw you over, and they shouldn't have done that, and this is hurting me in this way, and this is bad for me because of this. And you have this whole egoic story about how this situation is bad and how this person wronged you. And that's its own state of consciousness. So when you're stuck in that state of consciousness, you're forgetting that higher state of consciousness that you're in a couple days later when you look back on the situation, and say, oh man, like, what the fuck was I thinking? Like, that wasn't me. And that's a phrase people use a lot, especially, when they apologize. They're like, I'm sorry, I don't know what I was thinking. That wasn't me. That was, the anger talking, the feelings talking. So when you fall into that lower state of consciousness where you have a more narrow perspective, when I say like a higher or lower state of consciousness, it's basically the same as referring to how narrow or broad their perspective is. If you're open and able to see a broader perspective, and you're able to have just a more encompassing perspective and view on things, then that's living at a higher state of consciousness than somebody who has a narrow perspective and just doesn't see as much of the world for what it is. So when you're in that state of lower consciousness, where you're in that narrow perspective and you're thinking all those things and how the situation has wronged you, then you're forgetting about that higher state of consciousness that you would say is you. You're stuck in that state that's a couple days later, you're going to look back and say, that wasn't me. You're stuck in that state of not you. And what's happening when you're stuck in that state is you're like hiding in your own dramas. You're hiding in your own story that you're making up about the situation. And then a couple days later, you look back on it as the higher consciousness you, and you can see that difference in the person you were being. So it's like you at a fundamental level, hiding behind the story that you make up about a situation and say it's bad. You're hiding behind that drama that you're making about it. So like how I was saying, a lot of times you think about it a couple days later and you're like, oh, like what was I thinking? What you want to try and do is shorten that amount of time. Instead of being mad for a couple days and then reflecting on it then, the closer you get to catching yourself doing that in the moment, the better you get at this game of hide and seek. And the quicker you're able to pull yourself out of that bad experience of being angry or upset or feeling wronged, the quicker you're able to pull yourself out of that mindset and that experience that you're having and remember or find again who you are on that higher level of consciousness where you're much happier. You can also think of it as getting carried under the surface of water when you fall into these dramas and stories. And, like everybody likes to go swimming, we like to go underwater and hold our breath and dive into the water and all this stuff. But inevitably, you have to come up for air at some point. And this is a good way, Ram Dass described it. And you can fall into those dramas and stuff, but eventually, you have to come up for air. And eventually you'll come up for air and stay up, whether that's when you die or whenever you just have something happen in life that, awakens you to that. And that's like that state of finding ourselves. We go into life, like sometimes we might be fine at home, and whenever we're at home, we're living in that, higher state of consciousness where you could say you're, up for air. And then maybe we go to work or go to somewhere that we go on a regular basis, and that kind of drags us down to that lower state of consciousness where we're more likely to think like if you're at work and it's easy for you to notice someone screwed something up, or if someone is always screwing something up, then it'll be easier for you to fall back into that negative mindset. And you just have to remember that like you're always going to come up for that air eventually. Like your natural state is that higher state of consciousness, not that lower one where you feel bothered by bad situations and what other people are doing. And it just helps a lot getting through stuff when you can think about it like that and think about, that you're always going to come up for air at some point. No matter how many downs there are, there's always going to be, an up. There's always going to be like down and depressed or angry or irritated, any bad feelings. That'll never be like a baseline. That'll always be you being dragged down by your perspective on a certain situation. And the more you can learn to come up for air or find yourself in this game of hide and seek, then the more you're able to live in that higher consciousness perspective, and the more you're able to snap yourself out of bad feelings. Because eventually, like if you're playing actual hide and seek with somebody, if somebody's always hiding in the same spot, then it's just going to be that much quicker for you to find them all the time, because you're going to know where to go and you're going to recognize that hiding spot right away. And it's the same thing when you start getting used to catching yourself falling into these fits of negative feelings. Eventually, when you start to be mindful of that and recognize it happening in yourself, you'll start to catch yourself as soon as you get mad, and you can just look at it and be like, there's a mad feeling, there's anger, you can fall into that observer mindset. You can fall into that place in your mind that's watching your thoughts, not your thinking, but that awareness in your mind that is aware that you're thinking. And you can fall into that and take a third person view on the situation. And the more you do that, it's like building up a muscle. The more you do that, the better you're able to do it, and the more quickly you're able to notice yourself falling into these things that you don't have to be trapped by, and you're able to come up for air that much quicker. And the quicker you're able to do that, the less time you spend in that state of being upset or that state of lower consciousness, and the quicker or the more time you're able to spend in that higher state of consciousness.
One point to add is you really have to be careful when you start doing this training for your mind, that you train it correctly, and that you're actually identifying to the best of your knowledge.
Can you be a little closer?
Yeah. Of what is actually your...
Yeah, that's good.
But make sure you're actually identifying to the best of your knowledge of what is your higher consciousness, because so often your ego is just trying to make its point, and you think you're making this right decision when really you're not questioning enough to see through your ego's disguise. Just when you're upset at somebody, instead of trying to prove your point on how you're right, you have to just think about how the other person is right. If you have to go to that extreme to just remind yourself it's no big deal or it's a misunderstanding.
Yeah, you definitely have to be aware of what's actually your higher consciousness, because like you were saying, your ego is only able to be your ego by making you think that it is that higher consciousness that you're looking for. The ego is the universe's hiding spot from itself. So sometimes you might be in a situation where you have to decide to do something or not do something, and there's a clear answer of what's better for you and what's not better for you. And your higher consciousness will stop you from making the wrong decision right away, but then your ego will come in with a justification, posing as your higher consciousness, and it'll take that answer that your higher state of consciousness gave, and it'll be like, yeah, but I mean, you haven't had a Snickers bar in like a week, so you go ahead, eat it. It's okay. Or that's, obviously the decisions get a lot more important from there, but it's the same thing. Like, there's so many times that we justify doing what is going to fulfill some short-term desire, or we get tricked into fulfilling what our ego wants over some justification that the ego makes. And sometimes that justification is good enough for us to, be like, oh, that's the right answer. That's the higher consciousness telling me what is best for me. And it's not. I said that's the universe's hiding spot right there, is ego. There's also sort of a bigger game of hide and seek that the universe is playing. And when I say the universe, I'm talking about that that source of all creation, that energy, their consciousness that made everything. That's something that's formless. It doesn't have any form. It doesn't have any description. It doesn't have any definition in our world or in our reality. That was a bad way to start describing it, because it does have definition and form in our reality, but in its natural state, it doesn't have any form or definition. It's just the stuff that makes up all of creation. But when it's being what it is, when it's just being itself in its natural state and not playing this game of hide and seek, it's not anything. It hasn't created a universe or anything yet. It's like if you take a glob of Play-Doh or clay or something, and you start out with just one big, glob of it. You can think of that as like that source of everything. And when you look at it, if it's just a big glob of Play-Doh there, like, it's not made into anything yet. It's nothing yet. It's formless. It hasn't been made into any kind of form yet. And then you take it and you maybe make a house out of it. And now the Play-Doh is turned into some kind of form. So now you would look at it and say, well, that's a house. When before that, it wasn't anything for you to say that it is. So in this way, reality as we experience it is a world full of those houses. It's a world full of what we see, the stuff that original sourceness has made as. We don't see it as the original stuff. Like, it's like looking at the house and not seeing it as something made of Play-Doh or clay. It's looking at it and seeing a house and calling it a house, and having that, everything we know about a house, having that description in our mind about that lump of Play-Doh. So in that way, it's like the Play-Doh is hiding its Play-Doh-ness. It's hiding what it really is, which is a glob of Play-Doh. It's hiding that behind the description of a house. It's forming itself into a house and hiding in that description. And that's really the same way that it hides behind ego, because ego essentially is description. Ego is what the ego is telling itself it is. The more you define yourself, the more you separate yourself from something else. So the more you define yourself as, I'm this person, or I have this job, I'm somebody that has this job, or I'm somebody who's right in this situation, that's the ego strengthening or defining itself more. Or the ego turning itself into something. It's turning that you-ness, that original fundamental creative energy, that source of everything. The ego is like the house. It's the universe is turning itself into that ego to hide behind. And the more stuff that the ego makes itself as, and the more stuff that you describe yourself as, the bigger hiding spot it has, the more descriptions it has to hide behind. Like the Play-Doh hiding behind the description of the house. Ego is where we, as who we like really truly are at the most fundamental level, the ego is, all the descriptions the ego comes up with is where we're hiding behind, where that higher state of consciousness is hiding behind, waiting for us to find it again. So the house in that analogy made of Play-Doh, that's just one place for the Play-Doh to hide its trueness, what it really is. That's just one place. If you make a house and a car and a tree and you make a whole town, like a whole civilization out of Play-Doh, then each one of those separate objects is another hiding spot for that Play-Doh to occupy. In the same way, the ego, the more things you think that you truly are, the more hiding places you give that higher state of consciousness. So if you're attached to a bunch of different things that you identify yourself with, then it's going to be easier for you to fall into those trips of just thinking you're somebody who's being wronged in a situation, or it just makes that many more traps for you to fall into, as far as just forgetting that higher state of consciousness that you are. And you can see the ego creating all these different identifications to hide behind in just everything you are in life. Like if you were born and you were given a name, give me a name, Brandon.
Steven.
If you were born and you were named Steven, then that's who you think you are. You think you're Steven. When your parents start, you hear people start saying you're a baby and calling you a baby, then you start thinking, okay, I'm Steven and I'm a baby. Long ways down the road, you grow up and you get a job and you're like, okay, I'm Steven, I'm a grown up, and Brandon, give me a job.
Manure loader.
And I'm a manure loader.
Is that a job?
Somebody's got to do it. And the more of these things that and it's not bad to obviously have a job. It's not bad to be a defined person. It's just bad when you get lost in that and forget that that's not who you really are. And there's more, there's levels of you that are just a lot more genuine. And when you forget that, you get stuck in those lower levels of consciousness, and you get stuck in thinking you're Steven who has this job. And if you're Steven who has this job, then if something bad happens at that job, you have to be offended because you work at that job. If you don't identify who you really are with the person working at that job, then you realize that you have no reason to be offended about something that happens at it. If you don't identify yourself with a person who's offended in a certain situation, then you realize you're not really offended by it, and you don't take on those negative feelings about it. You just have to keep in mind that who you really are is a higher state of consciousness that isn't really divided into all the groups that you divide yourself into in life. Who you really are doesn't have all the descriptions of even a name or a job. So who you really are doesn't there's no reason for them to feel victimized or feel like they've been put down or held back somehow in a situation. And just like I said before, the better you get at this game of hide and seek, the quicker you realize that you're not that ego that's offended by a situation. You're that higher state of consciousness, and the quicker you can pull yourself out of it and less time you spend in it.
So I guess what you could really get out of this talk is just trying to focus your attention to realize if you're playing into this game or not. Are you getting too involved with your thoughts? It's just like it's just like when we talk about the universe being a drama as well, and you're the actor of this play. Are you convincing yourself you're really this person, or can you snap out of it and don't get too involved? Maybe it's making you cry a little bit, so you gotta, this isn't real, it's just a movie, it's just a movie. So are you getting too involved in this game or movie, however you want to picture it? Are you letting your ego take over too much and control your thoughts and where you're at in life? And when you start realizing all this and you are able to snap yourself out of the game or out of the drama, you start just getting that more oneness feeling and just all together with the universe, because you're not involving yourself in this abstract experience or this game you're playing. You're just the universe letting go for a second, just letting the happening be. You can just notice this too when you just see these really Zen people, and they seem to have that perfect answer to everything, and you're just like, how? And it's just, they're letting the happening just be the happening. They're not getting involved in, well, this should be this way because, and, well, maybe I should do this, but, And so you have to stop creating these excuses and justifications for problems. And if you have to, make sure you're actually identifying with your higher conscious. Really question the situation from as many perspectives as you can get. And if you're not that good at reaching out perspectives, then go to someone else and make sure you have an open mind to consider what they're going to say, because they're going to just allow you a different perspective on the situation. And if you don't like it, it's devil's advocate. They're just playing against you in a scenario. So just know if you don't think you're going to make the right decision, there's always fallbacks. Just keep questioning yourself until you're comfortable that you've really talked to your higher consciousness and are making the best decision to the best of your ability at that time. And maybe you will reflect in a few days and say, I could have done this a little differently. And that's just learning from your experiences. There's only more to gain from that, as long as you know you're doing the best of your ability. And truly trying to identify with that higher consciousness instead of just letting situations throw you around and just ragdoll you. You're on the roller coaster of life of, this situation happened to me, this person's making me feel angry because of this, my job's stupid because of this. You just let it happen and take what you want out of life rather than letting it throw you around and carrying you away into a position you don't want to be. Well, I think that wraps this talk up. I hope you got something out of it and can take it with you on your happy adventure. If you liked it, please hit that like button, subscribe, feel free to leave a comment and let us know what you're thinking, what you want to hear, What do you want us to talk about? Let's hear it. Hope you enjoyed, and take care.
See ya.